I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Russ Garrity. Mr. Garrity is a Senior Director within the Performance and Technical Services Division at GP Strategies. He has over 33 years of experience with all types of fossil-fueled, combined cycle, and alternative energy power plants across the globe. Mr. Garrity has an engineering degree from Southeastern Massachusetts University, and he currently serves on the Board of Directors for the Yampa Valley Electric Association in northwestern Colorado. During his career, Mr. Garrity has supported power companies within the United States, South Africa, Abu Dhabi, Malaysia, Singapore, Chile, Morocco, and many other countries. So for the past 10 years, he's supported operational excellence projects with various power generation facilities that face increasing competitive pressures. So with that, Russ, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kayla. I appreciate that very much. I'd also like to thank everybody else who's on the call with us today. I know how busy people are, and I very much appreciate your time. So the topic today, you can see our agenda here on slide 3, is operational excellence. It's obviously a very broad subject. We've got 20 minutes to get through it. So as a backdrop, I'll leave you with 2 thoughts here. One, we're going to have to focus at a very high level on operational excellence. And if you have questions, I'm sure Kayla, Laura Bowley, and many others will help you to dig deeper as we get past the webinar. And number 2, I'm going to focus really on the power industry. A lot of these topics apply, obviously, to all companies, particularly oil and gas and some of the other industries we work in. But we're going to focus on the power industry today. So let's get started. And as a quick first step, I'm going to go on page 5 here and give you about 30 seconds on GP Strategies for those who are unfamiliar with our company. Right now, it's a very important year. We're celebrating 50-year history. Our stock is traded on the New York Stock Exchange. You can look it up that way. We've got about 3,400, 3,500 professionals now. And particular to this audience we have today, we do work at about 250 power companies each year in many countries. On slide 6, those countries will be listed out in the various regions of the globe. Last time I checked, we are operating in 47 different countries. So enough on that. Let's move on to our topic today, which is operational excellence. So on page 8, you're going to see a bunch of words that we've put on the screen for you. Each year, we visit all kinds of power companies, and we talk to the senior leadership teams that across North America and across the globe at these operational excellence meetings. And each time we go to a meeting, the theme is very, very similar, but the language used is a little bit different. So a lot of people look at operational excellence through various different lenses. So for example, some of the people we talk to are very metric-driven and KPI-driven. In their language. Others want to achieve ISO 55000 certification. They're asset management driven. Others take a Lean Six Sigma approach, an HPI approach. But for today's purposes, we're going to call operational excellence the umbrella under which all these terms fit. And we'll describe that for you a little bit as we get further into the presentation. So on page 9, you're going to look at a definition for operational excellence. This comes right out of Wikipedia. We have distilled it down a little bit, but you can go on Wikipedia and see it. And I'm going to point out a few things about operational excellence that we think are important. Number 1, OpEx is all about continuous improvement and how do you measure those improvements using specific KPIs or key performance indicators, okay? Second thing I'll point out is that OpEx is not exactly a newfangled thing that's just come onto the block in the last year, 2 or 3 years. It really leverages a lot of the other tools that are out there that people are very familiar with, such as Lean, Six Sigma, HPI, and others. And the last point I'll make on this before we get started on the presentation in depth is that OpEx is really about changing the culture of organizations, okay? It goes beyond event-based model of improvement, and it's focused entirely on changing the culture. The culture change has to begin at the corporate or executive or senior leadership team level, and then it drives down through the various assets and the various plants that are under that umbrella. Alignment between those two views is very, very important, and we'll talk about that because OpEx is going to have to be accomplished at the plant level. It can be center-led. We believe in that philosophy very strongly for consistency, but OpEx is going to happen every shift, every turnover, every startup, every load change, every outage, every pre-job brief is where you're going to see the results of the OpEx program that you're instituting. So on page 10, this is really where we're going to spend the majority of our time today. This is just an overview slide, okay? And then for the rest of the presentation, we will take each one of these various steps, 1 through 5, and we will dig deeper into them. But as an overview slide, let me just say, we are recommending a practical approach that involves these 5 steps. Starts on the left-hand side of the page with strategy, right? This is something that is set by the senior leadership team, the board, corporate governance, the executive level on what we're going to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years as a company. The discovery phase, number 2, applies at both the corporate level and the asset level. Number 3, we're going to talk about assessments. And really, this is when we drop down from the corporate more into the plant level, and we'll describe that a little bit more later. Step 4 is really about analysis and benchmarking, right? This is where we're going to, based on the previous work, we're going to hopefully find some gaps or opportunities to improve under an OpEx umbrella. And number 5 is really focused on implementation, okay? This is where we're going to take steps to actually achieve the results that we're hoping to achieve under the OpEx umbrella. So that's an overview. Now let's go on to slide 11, and let's drop into each one of these areas and go a little bit deeper, okay? So right now, we're talking about step 1. We're talking about strategy. Every power company we visit has a 3 or 5 year strategic plan that they publish. And it's usually a revolving plan that every year it gets updated based on the latest, greatest, newest information we have. The leadership teams and boards look into the crystal ball, and unfortunately these days, for the power industry, the crystal ball is a little bit cloudy. We have coal under tremendous pressure from horizontal drilling, fracking, the Clean Power Plan. We have natural gas that's dipped down to $1.60 per million BTUs. We have PV solar panels that have changed from $8 a watt. The last I saw, they're down at 30 cents a watt. And we're seeing long-term power purchase agreements for renewables that are coming in under 4 cents per kilowatt hour. You know, if you add to that battery technology, demand-side management, microgrids, renewable portfolio standards, everything, it's definitely a chaotic world out there. But management and leadership is tasked with putting that plan out, that strategy out, and then we are going to pick some KPIs that help us gauge our progress as we move along that strategy spectrum, okay? On page 12, there is a very redacted version of a balanced scorecard that we worked on for an overseas client. It was a T&D transmission and distribution company overseas. And if you look closely, it's hard to see these words, but up at the top, you'll see the vision, mission, and strategy. And then down the left-hand column, you'll see a repetition of those strategies, one of them being operational excellence, where the KPIs are put across the page so that at the dashboard level of an executive, you can see how you're doing year to year on these. Now, obviously, there's a lot more depth in here, and there are cascading scorecards that go lower into the organization, down to the asset level, and the two of those must be aligned, or you're not going to get the results that you're hoping for. So that's really what we wanted to show you on the strategy piece. Let's go on to page 13 and look at the discovery piece. Discovery is all about establishing a baseline for where you're at. What is the current state that we're looking at? So when we do that, we want to look at all kinds of data that should be relatively available. right? So we're looking at reliability data, historical data. We're looking at incident reports. We're looking at how we approach benchmarking now if we do. A lot of companies get a little bit nervous when we start going into discovery because they think it's going to be a burden on them to come up with this information. It really doesn't need to be a month and year-long process at all for this. This is really days and weeks. This information should be available, and if it's not available, then that tells us something already. But we're looking for easily available data that gives us a snapshot of where we are in a current state, okay? So if you push on further and you're on slide 14, these are some of the areas that we think are key in discovery, right? These are the types of information you want to look at if you're evaluating what your current state is. So there's 5 areas here. And on the operations side, we want to look at, you know, the usual suspects: availability factors, capacity factors, heat rates, startup times, E4 rates. On the maintenance, it's more about PM and CM completion rates or wrench time, or, you know, are we using the CMMS just to order parts, or are we really using it for work management? Safety, environmental, and the talent and culture pieces. You can see all those metrics up there. You're free to read them. We want to look at both behavioral stuff and hard metrics when we go into the discovery phase. Okay, we're not going to be able to look at all these items, but we are going to be able to look at the ones that we think are the most important based on the needs we're hearing as we talk to the client. On page 15, we're going to go past that. Now let's drop down to the plant level and talk about how we would approach taking an OpEx assessment to a typical plant. So for a company, maybe it's a company that operates in North America. They have 5 regions. Maybe you want to look at 1 plant in each region. For an international company, maybe you want to look at 1 representative plant in each country. You'd want to look at different technology plants, right? It's different if you're assessing a coal plant versus a combined cycle plant. But what we're going to do is follow a set process, and we're going to customize what we do based on what we learned in discovery. So it's important when you show up on site that you know whether they use Maximo or tag length for their CMMS. It's important that you know whether the units are cyclical or base loaded. It's important if you know they're a VPP OSHA site or they're not, if it's in the US. The reason you want to do all this research is because buy-in is absolutely critical, and when you show up on site, you really want to have some expertise that applies to their lives. You can't be asking them very general and generic questions, or you're not going to get really the results that you're hoping for. On page 16, I know these 2 are very difficult to read, but this is really how you might prepare for an on-site visit. On the left-hand side of the page, there are these 40 OpEx assessment areas that we tend to look at as a company, right? They cover things like lockout, tagout, environmental health and safety, corrective action programs, et cetera. And on the right-hand side, there are these electronic scorecards that we actually use during the assessment periods, okay? So up front, in the early stages, we would pick 6 or 8 or 10 of these 40 standards that we think are important to look at for this particular company, and we would cut and paste, it's a loose term, some of the scorecards that already exist so that we can do an assessment that makes sense to the client. Okay, it's hard to see here, and we'll show you an example later. But if you look at the top on the right-hand side, you're going to see red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. That's just a 1 through 5 maturity scale rating that's very, very typical, where 1 is a low rating and 5 is a best practice. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the step 5 in this process. But you can see how the words on the left-hand page are what are an area in OpEx that we're looking at, and then the X's are filled in under those categories in terms of how we're doing. I'm going to move on to page 17 and talk for a minute here about a typical week on-site doing an OpEx assessment. There almost isn't a typical one because everybody's a little bit different. Sometimes we'll spend more time, sometimes we'll spend less time, but assuming it was a 1-week time frame, you can see how this schedule is pre-published and it's given to the client well in advance so they see what we're going to do while we're on site. So on the left-hand side, you see the Monday schedule, and we will always show up, do a leadership meeting to kind of recap where we are, what we're going to be doing, what we're looking at, thank them for their help. Then we will tour the plant, we'll go to the control room, we'll go to the maintenance shop, we'll go to the training facilities, whatever. Then we'll set up some interviews, you can see them on the schedule there. We'll set up times when we can walk through the facility and see things. We will actually spend time in the control room talking to operators and observing. It is a very collaborative approach. It's not, you always want to come across as helpful and working with them. You never want to come across as you're coming in and judging people. Every one of these things that we do, many of the people start off skeptical. By the end of the assessment, they're very, very engaged and appreciative of what we're doing because, honest to God, we are there to try and help them make their day-to-day lives better. On page 18, we're getting into the ends of the 5-step process here. This is on benchmarking. And there's 2 schools of thought out there, right? We can benchmark ourselves to our past performance, which we believe is a good thing to do. Are we getting better over time? Are we getting worse? Or are we stagnant? But you also could benchmark yourself against industry-recognized standards. And we would recommend you do both. For the industry-recognized standards, there are many out there, and they all have different pros and cons. But, you know, what we're trying to say is, are we in the top quartile, bottom quartile? Are we top 10? Are we getting better? Are we not? Kayla mentioned I work in the cooperative industry. We have all kinds of benchmarking data available to us through the NRECA organization, and we use that very religiously because you really do want to know how you fit into the bigger picture, not just against yourself. On page 19, we're down to the end here, getting close. One thing that's important about implementing changes, right? We had a strategy, we did some discovery, we assessed some things, we benchmarked ourselves, and we found some gaps, and we found some things. How are we going to fix those things? We think it's important that you start with the strengths and then move to the opportunities. Okay, so every power plant I've ever visited has strengths. There are certain things that they are very, very good at and they're very proud of, and we want to call attention to those items because they could be best practices that would help other facilities across the fleet. We always see opportunities at plants as well, and we need to document how those gaps can be closed over time. We're not going to make a huge laundry list that needs to be accomplished in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years. We're gonna prioritize things in a manner that makes sense, where we get the biggest return on our investment for the minimum amount of work, and that is really not as difficult as it may seem to do. We do that on slide 20. You'll see these maturity matrices that I presented earlier in the presentation, right? So if we were assessing someone against OpEx standard 12, whatever that may be, and this one is around procedures and logs and things like that, we would collect the data. The data is manipulated electronically, and it prints out a numerical rating, if you will, of where we sit on this maturity scale. Number 1 being not observed, number 5 being the best practice, and in the middle we're functional. So there's going to be a lot of check marks across this. A lot of companies are doing this self-assessing, using these types of tools. A lot of them are doing peer-to-peer reviews. We like all of those approaches. Whatever is going to give you the best result is something that we are going to get behind. Ideally, you will see progress. You will see your check marks moving from the left-hand side of the page to the right-hand side of the page over time. So I am down to my very last slide here. It is on page 21. And these are some of the keys to success that we've seen over time. I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them to yourself. We recognize that Many different power companies are in many different stages of OpEx, and they may be running into roadblocks. If they are, if you are, feel free to reach out to Kayla or Laura, and maybe we can get you some questions answered to the challenges that you're having. Maybe you're struggling getting leadership engaged. Maybe you're struggling trying to change culture. Maybe you're struggling on picking the actual KPIs to use. No matter what the problem is, we would like to be considered a resource, and we hope that today's discussion has at least given you a high-level overview of how OpEx could work for your companies out there. I thank you very much, and I'm going to now turn it back to Kayla.
Thank you very much, Russ, for that great presentation. I'm impressed that you squeezed it all in that short amount of time. We are just a little bit over, but what we're going to do is go ahead and move on to the Q&A part of the session. So if you're able to stay on for a few more minutes, I encourage you to. We obviously covered a lot in 20 minutes, and there is still more to discuss, so we encourage you to continue the conversation with Russ beyond today's session. His contact is available on the slide deck, and we'll be sending everybody a link to the follow-up blog post where he'll address some of today's key takeaways. As the questions keep coming in, I do also want to remind everybody that the recording and slides from today will be sent to the email address that you provided. So go ahead and I'm going to read the first one to you. Let's see. What are some of the ways that you increase buy-in at the plant level for OpEx projects? I know that buy-in was definitely something you expressed much importance on.
Sure. At the risk of being a little repetitive, the first way you can do it is by over-communicate what the process is and what they can expect. If you have not published a schedule of what you're going to do while you're on site, if you haven't educated people about the overall goals and how they fit into it, you're probably going to struggle with buy-in. The second thing I think that helps a lot on that is, again, recognizing the strengths when you do an assessment like this. There's always strengths out there, and we tend to focus on the weaknesses, and that is not the best place to start. Okay?
All right, sounds good. Next question is, do you recommend that someone use internal resources for OpEx projects or look outside for help? Is that usually needed?
That's a good question. I think I would probably fall right in the middle on that, right? I think that outside help helps, and I realize how biased that may sound, but a lot of times we're able to see things that have become wallpaper to the power plants that we're out there working with. I'm very much in favor of using internal resources at the power companies. They have a great deal of expertise. I'm very supportive of peer-to-peer reviews where a plant manager from plant A comes over to plant B or C and uses consistent tools to do evaluations. But I do think the outside perspective, that third-party perspective, adds some pretty good value as well. Thank you.
All right, another question. How can this be applied to industries outside of utilities?
I think very easily. Every business operates on KPIs, and every business wants to get better over time and improve their performance. And you see the metrics will change. In the oil and gas industry, they change. In the restaurant business, they change. But there's always metrics out there, and really what you want to do is set up a consistent, repeatable process that helps you to see where you're at, where your gaps are, and then find ways to close them and get them eliminated over time. So I think it's very applicable outside the power industry. My background is all power, so that's kind of where I come from on this one, Kayla. Thank you.
So in the interest of time, since we're a little bit over, I'm going to go ahead and we'll do one more question. If you do have another question for us, though, I'm going to leave the session open for a few minutes after we've closed. And what I'll do is I'll field these questions over to Russ, and we'll put that in that blog post and follow up with everybody so you have those. So we'll take one more. So this last one is, who develops the KPIs? Is that done at the plant level, or is it based on benchmarking?
The senior leadership team is setting the KPIs, if you will, for the company, and they will have an overall. I'll just pick an area, right? They will. At the senior leadership level, they will say we need O&M costs to remain consistent for the next 5 years. Now, that will cascade down into a different set of KPIs at the asset level that build up to staying within the O&M budget as a company. And then at the company level, they will look at the various assets and be able to see how people are tracking individually towards those goals. But that's a great question. We've actually worked with several companies to pick the right KPIs that they should be looking at, both at the corporate level and at the asset level. Thank you.
Great. Well, I know we didn't get to everybody's questions. Well, we'll be sure to send you that blog post here in the next couple of days. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is wrap it up. Thanks again to today's speaker, Russ Garrity, and thanks to everybody who attended for your time and attention. We hope that you'll join us again for our next session, Developing Effective Reliability Strategies. This will be next week on March 15th. So for GP Strategies, I'm Kayla Rotz, and I wish everybody a great day.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.